Hello, everyone. Welcome to our special talk today with executive producer at Digital Domain, John Canning, who has an extraordinary body of work to brag about and has recently had his work featured on the cover of Time magazine when his project around the recreation of Martin Luther King Jr. Was featured there. He's also on the team that is responsible for creating Thanos and other Marvel characters in the absolutely epic Avengers series of films. But today we're not going to talk so much about VFX as we're going to talk about those digital humans themselves and what are the implications of digital humans. And in this series of talks that we're running, we're looking at what does this even mean to be a digital human? It's more than just looking like something, it's being like something. And the future is going to be really strange as these personas uh, become citizens, as they get agents at CAA and William Morris, and
Yeah.
they start to represent us in ways that we can't yet fathom. They might outlive us, they might represent us when we're gone. So let's explore the different facets of what it takes to make a human digitally. Um, it's not easy to do. I mean, if you look back even 5 years, it wasn't the same as it is now. So, John, let's talk about this topic and what you think about when you're tasked with creating something that looks realistic and acts and feels and breathes like something that's living.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I often say the interesting part about our job is that if we do our job well, you don't know we did it, right? Um, and I use a project that we did. We worked on elements of Ready Player One, and there's a famous shot that gets used in a lot of promo pieces and everything. Is where Wade's taking the headset, and you see this, and then he puts it on, and bam, you're in the Oasis. That shot, and I could even pull it up, is a digital head of Wade. And if you go back and look at that shot, you realize there's no other way to do it because literally the camera tracks like this and then would go through the back of his head because he's like taking the headset and he's doing this, and you're seeing this like bam right into it, right? It's a digital head of him because it's a shot that you can't necessarily do some other way. So that is, part of that movie magic. And look, so my job at a digital domain is I call myself the executive producer of not film, nor television, nor commercials. So my job is to help our company go and take our visual effects expertise into other areas. And one of those areas is working with our digital humans uh, team, the research team. We started creating characters like this in movies, and there's an Orville Redenbacher moment that we won't discuss much. Um, it was creating, during the Titanic. There's a shot. Remember when the boat does one of those things and it's about to slip into the water and people are hanging onto the edge. You see people falling, and well, one of those guys that smacks into the propeller and then goes into the water
Mm-hmm.
was a digital human.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't super high fidelity. You didn't need to see his facial expressions, but it was a digital character, little digital character. And so periodically we've refined the art more and more. Benjamin Button, for example, um, going in and working with uh, and creating Tupac as a hologram, right? That was a digital human. It was a head replacement, so creating Tupac's head and putting it on a real body, and then projecting it, all the way up to Thanos. And when the team was working on Thanos, they were developing more and more of the facial capture technology. So before then, in like Benjamin Button, you had a performance of a character on, with the other characters. And then Brad Pitt had to go sit in a dark room. We always say sit in the barber's chair and give facial performances that we capture,
Mm.
and then we would merge those things together. You fast forward to Thanos, you had Josh Brolin, who was able to act on with his other fellow actors. We were doing a facial capture of his performance at the same time. So he's acting. He's not giving two different performances, one for the body and then go back and do one for the face. He's giving his whole performance at that time. We're capturing all of it, the body movements and the facial expressions. And we were able to do that and deliver the product even faster, but with a fidelity that really enabled Josh Brolin to act and not have to push his performance, or it wasn't a bunch of artists going in and judging it. It was Josh Brolin. So the team took that technology and said, let's continue to evolve this. And now we're pushing it into real-time engine. So taking the facial capture, being able to create these, capture these performances and then translate it either into pre-rendered or into a real-time engine and bring that kind of fidelity. So you're breathing life into these characters. And we are trying to push the uncanny valley. And for people out there, if you go, what's the uncanny valley? It's that you have characters that are obviously avatars, not real, like an anime character, right? Like, oh, that's an anime character. I wouldn't confuse that as being a real human. Then you have video like this. I'm a real person. Well, the uncanny valley is that part where it's almost right, but not quite. And in a lot of times, you couldn't put your finger on why it's not right, but your back of your brain's going, that's not real. Can't tell you why. Just doesn't, they're not moving right, or they're not feeling right. So our goal is to push back past that. And we've done it in the pre-rendered film world. Again, going back to sometimes you don't know we've done the work that we've done because it looks real. Now, can we do that in the real-time engine? And that's the goal and the push with companies like, working with the NVIDIA folks, working with the Unreal Engine, and be able to push that state of art to get hair that responds, at enough frames per second in a real-time engine that looks like real hair. It is, so Doug Roble, who's our head of software, has been our guinea pig for this journey that we've then continued to expand from. And the point is that, getting Doug in a real-time engine to the point that you can't tell the difference between a video of Doug and a real Doug, a video of a Doug and a real-time version of Doug. We're getting close. And that's just the crazy thing. Now, the interesting part about creating digital humans is somebody will run up to me and say, we need to create a digital character, a digital human. The things that you have to start asking, are we copying somebody? Is that person alive? Can we get access to that person? All of those things start factoring into how do you do this? I often say, you could make a character from scratch. You can make a person from scratch. If I give you a photograph, it's much easier. If I give you more and more to work with, it's much easier. It's like taking a lump of clay. I can give you a lump of clay and say, go make a bowl, or I can maybe give you the rough shape of the bowl that I want and say, go finish it. So that's, literally how we start this process. When we worked on recreating Dr. King as a historical recreation, and I like to say it's a historical recreation. What we were focused on was recreating a moment in time, that day, the March on Washington and his speech, and reproducing it in 3D, right? You've seen it in you've seen photographs, you've seen black and white video, you've heard recordings. What we were trying to do is enable you to be there as best we could and be with the 3D version of that Dr. King on that day.
So did you have an actor play him and then just do a face replacement, like a deep fake process, like a GAN
Yeah,
thing?
good question. And not in that case. And I'll talk about it. And there's actually, we worked with Time and the team, and there's a great behind the scenes video of the process. But what we did is Stephen Ferguson is a gentleman that gives the speech. And he's blessed by the King family and the estate. He does an amazing job. You can kind of close your eyes and you're like, whoa. And so that's like our performance actor. But he doesn't look like Dr. King. And so then what we did is we looked for somebody that we can call a face bridge. So somebody who has a facial structure like Dr. King, a skin tone that like Dr. King, and we scanned them. So we had Ferguson doing the performance, giving the speech, and tuning that, right, so that he is raising the hand at the right time. He's he's trying to get his facial expressions, the beat and the cadence of the speech. So we did that mocap and that facial capture. But what we did is then we created Dr. King, and we used our tech to, and it is a machine learning process, to map the performance to that head. And we created, it's a full 3D body. So it's not just a head replacement, it is a full 3D character of Dr. King. And then putting that in a real-time engine. So, in that case, it was a full 3D character. But we, again, use these things to help bring the authenticity of that.
How do I experience this piece?
Well, that was the tough part is that we were working with Time, and the Time's release strategy was to work with museums to get into public places. And we did a launch at DuSable Museum in Chicago, but unfortunately that was in March.
Mm-hmm. For those watching this 10 years in the future, we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic, which effectively shut down all public spaces.
Yeah, so a couple weeks into that, unfortunately, the museum had to close. As with everything, had to close. We all had to stay home. So we're working, hoping the museum can reopen. But the Time team was working very diligently and talking to a lot of different museums. And some of it is a location-based VR experience. And anybody that's in that business knows there's all the different challenges and all the different decisions you have to make. And then you have to work on throughput. And it's not just a VR experience, right? There's an onboarding audio bath experience that puts you at the place and time. Then you go into another area where 4 people are simultaneously in headsets that are wireless, going into the experience. And then there's an exit experience. So there's an onboarding experience, offboarding. So it's, a lot of museums are thinking about what's my throughput? How do I do this? Do I have space? What timing? So DuSable, I think the first African-American museum in the U.S. If I get that wrong, I'm sorry. But an amazing museum, really, vied for this, wanted to be the first. And the goal is to have many more museums. But I think that is a challenge, obviously, as we all think about next steps. And, unfortunately, VR is about putting something on your head right now. And, I say to Amy over at Cleanbox, it's like your company is at no better time than now. And, with the Cleanbox technology and the ability to clean a headset in under a minute and make it hygienically safe is now more important than ever, right? So we're also discussing with the Time team on other ways that we can bring this out. And part of this is we were pushing the edge of technology. Sometimes maybe pushing it a little too hard. So what we're using a Vive Focus Plus as the headset, but we're rendering it on a server on the other side of the wall. So and then we're wirelessly pushing it to the headset. So you essentially have a bit of edge computing going on here, where high-end PC rendering the experience, we are maxing out a high-end NVIDIA card and driving that to the headset, where we're using wireless tech, the Viveport streaming, which was in beta. I think it's now out of beta, but all of this was pulling these pieces together, trying to push the next generation of a museum VR experience. right? Get rid of the wires, give more mobility, the comfort factor. But it's all of this was pushing the edge of the headset tech. It's pushing the edge of rendering and real-time engine tech. So it was a crazy experience, like I said, sometimes I think we were pushing the edge a little too hard. But we had to do that because we were designing an experience, and I'm sure many folks out there know this problem where somebody comes up and says, we want to push the boundaries of what is possible a year from now. And so you're literally trying to do this, right? And you're trying to go to the bleeding edge tech, knowing that it's going to evolve and get better. You don't want to work on stuff that, is like, oh, this is the release today, if you're working and thinking about a product a year from now. So it's a gamble, and one that it paid off in a lot of ways. But the interesting thing now, we're getting to the point where edge computing, wireless tech, all of these things are now taking that next step. So, I mean, obviously the goal would be to get it into schools, to get it much broader. But it's how do you not require a high-end PC to render it?
All right. Well, we'll talk about that sort of thing in an LBE panel. I want to stay
Yeah,
on the
sorry.
topic of the digital hue. No, I get it. I mean, there's a lot of factors in the practicality of deployment, but there's so many different things that we have to consider right now that'll be meaningless 5 years from now. I think what will be meaningful is how do we render people in a way that will endure, that will, it's like baking something at 19 or 1080p right now and knowing that it's going to look terrible 2 years from now. All of these are LBE concerns, which we're not going to talk about so much today, except that we're looking at obviously there's the balance, the practical balance of deploying this. But let's just say that that's not what we're concerned with. Let's talk about creating, here's an example. It's very well known. I've talked about my grandfather several times, who I had scanned by quantum capture 10 million polys shortly before he passed away. And I've got this model for Unreal Engine of my grandfather, made by one of the top companies in the world. Now, it's not animated. I would not want to reanimate it. I feel like that would be some sort of, I don't know, some sort of sacrilege, maybe. But some of us might want to be remembered that way. And I would definitely subject myself to, well, maybe when I'm a little leaner and don't have the pandemic pounds on, but, to saying, let's have a scan of my head or whatever, and then my kids could see what I was like, or whatever the case, How do you future-proof this? How do you make sure that there are certain kind of fundamental elements that will not age? What are those elements? What are those things that really give something a sense of reality of life,
Yeah.
when you're not worried about how you'll do it in an LBE situation?
Oh yeah, no. And that was a conversation about that project, where it's like, wait a minute, are we building something that'll instantly not look great the day after, because some new cards released or new tech? And I've thought a lot about this. I think if I step away from digital humans only for a second, but just to think about, you mentioned, like, do a video at 1080p, and what is that, now, or, you think about, HD quality, maybe 720, and how does that look on your 4K television? But I think what's interesting is, I'm a videographer and a photographer, and when I would teach video courses, I would say to people, look, you can have a shitty image and great audio, and you can still do something with that. If you have amazing video but shitty audio, you're pooched.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about documentaries, I think about work I've done where it's the power of the story and what you're telling, and some of the imperfections, the details, or the, don't matter as much as potentially the experience you're building. And you have to keep that in mind. Some things visually won't hold up as the best because of the advancement of technologies. But to think about what is the experience you're creating, the moment, um, it's again, you can do a digital recreation of me that people look and go, oh, that's John Canning. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one down to my pore level. And in fact, it might be better if it's not, because I've got blemishes and we don't want to see those. Um, but is it recognizable as me? Um, and a still image, say of your grandfather, yeah, you want that resolution because there's the stories you're making up in your head, but there's no talking, there's no moment. It's a snapshot. And in recreating Dr. King, the interesting thing was, as we were going through the review process with the estate and talking to the family and other individuals, sometimes people would bring up a photo on a phone, or they would do a Google search and go, well, that doesn't look like him. Yeah, well, and say, well, that photo was in 1960, X, or that was a different day. I mean, the interesting thing is to think about when we, like I said, doing a historical recreation of that day,
Mm.
is we were doing our darn best to match in 3D the 2D him of that day,
Mm.
right? And if you think, you were talking about your COVID pounds and the look you have. I just got my hair cut after 3 months. Um, we fluctuate as humans greatly day to day. What did you have last night? How well did you sleep? Did you drink too much? Are your eyes too baggy? So the thing is that we're talking about capturing people at moments in time, but it's also interesting to see how that will evolve. And I think what we're looking at, the digital human capture, even Doug, they started scanning him 2 years ago. And the interesting thing now is to look at the real man and look at the digital imagery that we're creating. And they're playing with the slightly aging him. We're playing with the neural network, the GANs, to see how, say, capturing video of me and then applying it to my digital model, how does it update it? How does it change it? How does it bring that authenticity? I think that's the big thing we think about. And I think as a creator and as a storyteller and as a historian, is you think about what you're trying to do. Am I creating a virtual being that doesn't necessarily exist, has no frame of reference? Am I recreating a historical character? And what point in time? How are we doing that? Um, so, our focus with the March was authenticity, was historical recreation. So I'm not saying we wanted to go set out and make a digital human of Dr. King. We wanted to do a historical recreation of that day. And so trying to be authentic to that day and trying to be authentic to the look and the environment and things like that was the important part, because you're putting people in that moment and you want them to experience that. And it's like opening up a history book. Is it accurate? Is it telling the story? Is it giving that, what happened? Looking at photographs.
Let me go back
Uh,
to GANs for a second.
sure.
So generative adversarial network is going to look at, it's going to take a source. It's going to take many, many instances of that source, and it's going to understand what is consistent between them, right? And then it's going to synthesize, model a version that takes into account the many, many different permutations of that source, such that the generated facsimile is almost indistinguishable because it's looked at so many different versions. Is that a generally good description of what a GAN is?
Yeah, I think that's, it's sort of the digging into what is a deep fake, right? What powers a deep fake.
Right. Now, here's
And yeah,
what I was going to say about this is I was going to say, if why is it that something like The Irishman or this or Rogue One has this enormous pipeline and workflow, and you're building the veins layer and the blood in the skin layer and all of this stuff, and then somebody goes and makes a deep fake version on YouTube, and it's a pretty good competitor to the other. What do you have to say about? I mean, this is obviously working in 2D space. It's like, well,
Sure.
it's easy for you to take the finished product and stick
Yeah.
a deep fake over top of it. Try making the volumetric version of that. So I don't know. I just wanted to touch on this point. Like, people sort of did a better Irishman with deep fakes than all the effort that it took to de-age, um, Pacino or whatever.
Yeah. Um, that's the interesting. I mean, that's why we're working with the technology as well. Is it's using a blending of technology to get the best results. And I think what's interesting is what your statement was is there's a lot of folks. It's going that last inch, or it's like you could run a race, but it's the last moment of crossing the finish line. And I think there's the you can get close. You can say I like the statement somewhere. I think you said pretty good, right? Like the distance between pretty good and indistinguishable. Then like it's easier to get up to the pretty good, and then it's this little gap. It's harder and harder and harder. It's when we talk about blood flow and subdermal reflections and things like that. What you're trying to do is recreating a human is hard in 3D. It's hard because there's a lot going on here, right? Like it's not just what happens on the surface, but what happens underneath. It's my skin is not smooth. It's got uh, um, texture. It's got the little peach fuzz moments. All of that is digitally hard to do, and then to bring that to a go from still to animated to animated 2D to animated 3D. You're just layering up your complexity. What's interesting is like you said, there's pretty good, or there's a lot of the deep fakes start bringing that uncanny valley. You watch a deep fake and you're like, that almost looks right, but I don't know why it doesn't look right.
It's because it's a very young technology.
Right. No, no, and that's why.
That's all I mean, geez, in two
Yeah.
years, how far that's come versus how long it took to get to this point with CG, um,
That's right.
is crazy. And I think it'll become, I mean, one of the things that's always been the sort of Achilles heel of CG work, and I hate saying this because I have so much respect for all the work that's ever been done, but as soon as you get a movie that is overly CG'd and the monster just moves too quickly and it just doesn't have the gravity and the weight and the heft.
Yep.
I mean, even watching you on this screen, it's very low quality in terms of, like, I don't see the peach fuzz on your face. I don't see the wrinkles on your face. I don't see your pores. It's awesome, right? But I'm just seeing chunky pixels mostly, compared to
Hey,
you look like a chunky pixel. Anyway, the,
I've been called worse.
the thing about it is you still look very human, and I believe that you're real. There's something about the movement, even if you make a fast expression, there's something that roots it in a body. And why is that so difficult to do in CG? It's like a Harryhausen effect, right? Like, how slow does it need to be? What angle do you shoot it from? What is
It's
that?
it's what I like to say is humans are really good at doing humans, right? Being human. And this goes into that conversation is like, AI replacing actors and things like that. And I'm like, it goes back to the Josh Brolin conversation. What we did is used underlying AI machine learning process to enable Josh Brolin to act. Not that we enabled him acting, but what I'm saying is it was like, just go act, perform, and we're going to capture that and translate it into the big purple guy. And
So
if
basically,
we
you super cheated, because
if we do it,
if
yeah,
you
I
had to
mean,
start from scratch, how would you do Josh Brolin? I mean, is there?
well, that's
Yeah,
right. And so here's the interesting thing, and this is where talking about maybe digital humans versus virtual humans
right.
or virtual beings is, and again, we all are defining things and making definitions, and even internally, we're like, do we call it digital humans or? Is that I tend to say digital humans, I'm recreating a human, a known person. They exist, and then a virtual being is somebody that doesn't exist. Now, the interesting thing is you could model it off somebody that exists. But again, they, I mean, the thing is, the people that know me know I have quirks. I do certain things. In fact, the funny part is when I first met Doug, I met the digital version of Doug. First coming to DD, seeing some of the videos and things like that. Saw this digital version of Doug, and I was like, that blinks a lot. Like, guys, you should kind of fix that. It's just a little weird. Then I met the real Doug. The real Doug blinks a lot. So I was like, oh, I get it. Basically, this is a version of him. And if you know Doug, and if you know me, and you do a digital version of me, it needs to have the same quirks, the same mannerisms, or you'll go, not right. And I do me well. Somebody trying to do an impersonation of me, it's just like having a good impersonator versus somebody's like, nah, you're close, but you're not great. Or, yeah, you can do maybe a good Al Pacino for one statement of the movie, but can you give me a good Al Pacino dialogue? Maybe.
Let me go
It's
back
like,
to something about monsters, though. Why is it that in the Spider-Man movies, in the early ones, when I see something jump from one place to another, it feels too light, too quick, too fast? But at the time, it was great. And then
yeah,
a year later, I'm like, that just looks like it's
it's
made out of plastic or something.
I mean, if you look at visual effects houses like ours, um, and big visual effects houses, small, it's about the artistry. It's about, you know, when you're creating animation and rigging, you're trying to emulate something, right? And monsters are tough because we don't have a frame of reference. Like you know, animators like when you're creating. We worked on Beauty and the Beast, for example, the live action version, and created wolves. And there's a study of wolves, right? And you can study a wolf's movement, and an animator can go, okay, I can get that in. Or doing mocap. You can mocap an animal, right? Motion capture. So you can put, the question is, how do you get the little dots to stick? But I found out one day, like, you put a little jacket on them. But you could motion, and that's why we do motion capture, right? That's the the tipping, the point where, like, you can have an animator animate a body, or you can have somebody animate the body by doing what they do as a human and capturing that and translating it. And that's why it looks so much more natural, because when a human's doing it, they do it right. An animator then has to struggle to emulate all that. And your monster thing is somewhat of a perception of how does a monster move, right? Like, and that's what I think is fascinating about the business and the art of this, which is, especially when we're talking about non-human characters, is going into the how does it move, how does it feel right. And look, that's why Andy Serkis is who he is and where he got. Gollum, instead of animating it by hand and creating that, had a person who breathed a performance into it. It's tough, and that's why I said, like, I can give you a piece of clay, or I can give you a semi-molded piece of clay. I can say, go build a monster from scratch and make it jump, or is there something that I can give as a frame of reference? But if it's so non-human, then you're trying to say, well, what does it emulate? And then, it's like a lot of folks in the business will take references from nature, right? Like, oh, that monster moves like a praying mantis, or, so you pick and you can do a study and then emulate that. And then if it kind of looks like a praying mantis and kind of moves like a praying mantis, your brain's like, that seems right.
Do you think
So
that
I think
AI
that's,
will get better at this than humans? Like, do you think that AI will be able to look at the muscular relationships of a wolf as it moves and say, "Oh, I know why the humans can't get it right," because they're looking at it from the outside in. Well, even if they're doing all the rigging and everything, but
yeah,
I know sort of ratio based um,
yeah,
things going on.
mechanics and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I think what's great, and even in the facial capture process, our masquerade system, um, it's what's great is we're able now to process so much more data using a machine learning process.
Hmm.
And I was having this conversation with somebody last night. And they were like, well, how long does it take? And it was like, well, the machine process takes X. Then the QC by somebody who knows what they're looking at takes this much time, right?
Right.
And what's great, what I like about it is we're now, the demand to crank through so much more content means that if you were making artists crank through that by hand, you're that much, some cases it just, the math doesn't work. You can't do enough. What's great is now you're enabling these artists and these talented folks to be much more the refiners. Remember, like, let the machine process get this much done, and then this last bit, which is the important part, which is the subtle nuances, the making sure it's right, becomes the artistry.
We're the taste
Right.
testers, John. You know those little bottles behind you on the shelf? What are those?
Oh, yes, these.
Right. What is that?
So, oh, sorry, it's too bright. Sorry about that.
I can see it.
It says malt nuts, Glenfarclas 3B. So, I belong to a whiskey tasting club called the Malt Nuts, and it's a prolific tasting group where we're over 1,000 different tastings. This was expressions of Glenfarclas, and there were 14 different expressions of Glenfarclas. All like this was there was 1, 2, and 3 set of tastings, and we were doing it by Zoom, where literally blind tastings, going and tasting it, rating them, discussing them, and then doing the reveal. But it goes it goes deep into the esoteric whiskey aspect, which I happen to love.
So here's my point about that. My point about that is, and this is a fascinating kind of intellectual framework, is all we're trying to do here is just fool the humans. Like, we're not making these things to fool anything else at this point, just the humans. We're the ones that are doing that final taste test and making that minor distinction between this has got a little note of this and a little note of that. I think about a phone when I'm shooting the forest on my Samsung S10 Plus, and I think this camera to an alien would be a perfect study of how a human sees, because the camera is only trying to do what it needs to do for me to see it look like the way a human sees it. The greens are for a human. The spectrum of colors is for a human. The contrast is for a human. And I go, wow, that's a great camera because it looks a lot like what I see.
Mhm.
Some might say, sure, a cat would see it the way that a cat sees it, so it'll still be consistent for a cat, right? I guess the question I'm getting at is, it's a bit philosophical, but it says, are these digital humans and virtual beings, and are they meant to just be good enough to fool us, or are they going to need to have a bigger reason to be convincing later? Are they going to get you through some kind of a scanner? Are they going to need to fool an animal or a robot? I know it's a weird philosophical question, but right in the end,
We
we're
might
just
have
convincing humans.
right. Oh, yeah, that's wow. You've obviously you've had Kent around, haven't you? Um,
So we're just talking about the fact that all of this needs to really do, seemingly, is to convince a human, right? Like, the whiskey is nuanced to you, the human taster. It probably doesn't taste like that to a different kind of species. So the camera is a representation of what the human believes to be realistic.
yeah.
Um, when will this matter beyond just the frame of the movie? When will this matter beyond the museum exhibition, and it
Sure.
becomes, this is something that it could be held up in court, that this could be used in interesting new ways.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different like come into this. The interesting thing is today, is your signature going to hold up in court? I
Hmm.
mean, I'm not even talking about you, like what you look like and things like that. If you think about the notion of authenticity and verification is something that is very old. Um, you know, I get in, I get into conversations with people where they were like, well, wait a minute, you're making digital characters of real people, and how will we be able to distinguish is real? It's the end of the world as we know it. And I said, They said the same thing when we had Photoshop, right?
Right. And in
Um,
China, they can recognize, they use gait recognition, the way you walk down the street, you know.
right. I mean, so there's a lot of these things, where it is the technology is continuing to march on. And the fascinating thing is you think about how hard technology has to work to do what the human body does really well. You were talking about your photograph. Do you know how hard it is to get a camera to accurately, and all the software to accurately represent what your eyeball is doing? Your eyeball, and how many of you out there have taken a photograph and you looked at it and went, that's not how it looked?
Hmm.
Um, and you're like, but the sunset looked so much prettier when I was looking at it. Um, the we're now getting to where that, easy peasy technology does as good as what an analog camera did, right? Um, that it is, we are constantly trying to emulate what the human does really well. Go back to Josh Brolin. Josh Brolin does Josh Brolin really well. An AI system doesn't do Josh Brolin really well. Um, we're trying to make that technology do that. And I think there's that constant strive to get better, 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 better. But the fascinating thing is just how hard it is to try to get back to the thing that we do so well. Us, really well.
Did you ever read the book Perfume by Patrick Suskind? It was Kurt Cobain's favorite book. He wrote the song Scentless Apprentice about it. And the whole book is about this kid that is got terrible senses, bad sight, bad, hearing, but he's got this acute sense of smell. And as he
Mhm.
grows up he's basically trying to capture the essence of the world around him through smell. And
Sure.
he becomes so obsessed that he starts to try to figure out how to extract the soul of a woman, the soul of a person on the street, uh, and trying to figure out exactly what it is, those pheromones that it gives off. And I think that why this will matter in the end is when you do want to bring someone back from the dead, when you want to have your father, your friend back with you, and you want a chat bot to somehow create that.
Right.
You're going to need to know what was that kernel, that essence of that person that can now be induced. I think that's why this is all relevant. And I think that's why we want to talk to people like you who have spent so much time looking at this problem and trying to understand this problem. And it goes beyond, not to diminish it, but it goes beyond a movie problem into a
Mhm.
world where there are going to be more dead people on Facebook than living soon. And, is all we're going to have a series of memes? What would be just enough to kind of recreate that person and spend a little time with them again? And this has been done. I mean, in Japan, there was an example of a mother who visited her 9-year-old daughter who had passed away, and she was deeply moved. But
Right.
in the end, that's what we want to get from these sorts of conversations. How will we get there? What do we know? Something we can't do in this 15-minute talk, but these are the reasons that we ask.
Right. Right. I think the interesting thing to me is it does, like I said, my job is beyond entertainment, right? I am the executive producer of not the film, television, or commercials. I am visual effects for other screens. And I think about doing the historical recreation of Dr. King, and I just, my mind goes to how many more amazing experiences could we create to help create living history, right? And then you think about, well, is it just a moment in time? Is it it's like thinking about the Pompeii and the lead up to that, and like experiencing, stepping through history. Um, we're just accelerating the pace of what we can do. And you look at video games, and that's the interesting crossover to me of like the Assassin's Creed and how much time they spent in recreating historical places and accuracy. And it's almost like that window in another world. Oh, by the way, I'm playing a game, but that's the art and the craft from different industries is all colliding together in just a fascinating, fun way. And it's like I said, we technology is working really, really, really hard to try to catch up to um, what we can do in real life. Video is really good at bringing fidelity. game engines, real-time engines, are really good at bringing interactivity. And this right here, this is what I'm excited about. This is that moment. And, creating digital characters is about, is it a performance or is it an interactive moment? And like I said, if you look at the game world, people are very used to, in games, playing another character in another persona, playing a creature, playing a, a different human. And what's fascinating to me is if you take what we do in the fidelity of the film world and I hand that to somebody, I'm just saying, I'm giving you a higher fidelity way to perform and act. What I will conclude by saying, if I could, that what I think is amazing is we're using enabling tools and technologies to enable the craft to come through, to enable an actor to act in any different circumstance, to not be limited by race, color, creed, size, shape, to really just kind of blow open the possibilities
of expression.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John Canning. Your work is amazing. The work that your team does is amazing, and we will keep watching to see how it evolves and guides us into the future.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and I work with an amazing group of talented technicians and artists and creators. So it's a joy, and I hope to build more.
All right. See you at VRTO.